Hello and welcome to chapter 17 of our HTML and CSS web development course. Now in this chapter 17 we are going to talk about HTML5 layout. HTML5 layout, and I'm going to spell out the elements used in HTML5 layout. We're also going to explain how old browsers understand new elements. For instance, there are new elements in HTML5 that does not work well in old browsers. Okay, so we are going to explain how old browsers will be able to render elements of HTML5 and also do some styling using CSS. Now, the traditional HTML layout, okay, is that there is a lot of divs in the use. Okay, they use a lot of divs to group the elements together, okay, on a page. Now, when there are a lot of divs, okay, the divs are used for headers, for articles, for footer, and for sidebar. What we do is we put a lot of IDs and a lot of classes. So we give a lot of class names so that you can style them together, and a lot of ID attribute, and you'll be able to style them together. So you see a lot of divs. The divs actually describe the structure of the page. Okay, so usually at the top of every page you see the header. Okay, the header contains the logo and then the nav bar. Okay, we are also going to talk about how to add articles, okay, and how to add links to individual posts and pages. Okay, usually the sidebar is on the right, okay, which contains search options, it contains favorites, list or recent posts, okay, and what have you. And then when you are coding such a site, okay, you usually put these main sections of the page inside the div and use classes and IDs to indicate the purpose of those pages. Now this is the classical example of a traditional HTML page, the structure. So you see there's a div. First of all, this div is covering the entire web page, and it has an ID, okay, and then you see other div here that contains the header, which talks about the navigation bar, another div which refers to the content, another div for the article. So you see a lot of divs. In fact, the sidebar also is a div, and then the footer is also a div. So either you see a class or an ID. That is what they use in styling and to differentiate between the elements. Okay, they group them together in divs. That is what is usually done in the traditional HTML5. Now the HTML5, okay, has brought in some new elements that allow you to divide parts, okay, of the page. Usually it's just like the same as the traditional HTML, but in the new HTML5 element, they've brought in a lot of elements that came to substitute the divs. So you will not be seeing a lot of divs as compared to the traditional HTML, but it's almost the same structure. Now the HTML5 brought an element called header, okay, and there's an element called nav that is used in the navigation. The header sits inside a new header element, okay, the navigation is in the nav element, and the articles are in the article. The point of creating this new element is so that web page authors can use them to help describe the structure of the page. For example, if you are using a screen reader software, you might program it to ignore all headers and footers and get straight to the content and read it out. Let's say for those who are visually impaired. Similarly, you can also allow search engines to put more weight on the content in the article than in the header or the footer. Okay, now this is the structure of the new HTML5. You see, it's the structure is just the same, but just that if you check around this place, this has replaced a div. This element here has come to replace a div, and there's article here also replacing a div. But in the previous one, you would have seen a div here with an ID or a class. You see a div here with an ID or a class to represent the sidebar. So it's actually the same structure as we showed you, but in this case some elements have come to do the work of a lot of the divs. Okay, now let's talk about headers and footers, or the header element and the footer element. Okay, they are used, the header especially is used for the main header. Okay, and then the footer also appears at the bottom to give additional information about the page. Okay, now the header or the footer for an individual article or section within the page. In the example I'm going to show you, the header element used to contain the site name and the main navigation or the primary navigation. The footer element contains copyright information along with links to privacy policy and terms and conditions. Now each individual article and section element can also have its own header and footer element to hold the header or the footer information for that section within the page. For example, on a page you might have several posts. Okay, now each post can also be taught as a separate section. The header element can therefore be used to contain the title and the date of each individual post, and the footer might also contain links to share the article on social networking sites. Now this is an example explaining what the header contains and what the footer contains. So if we check here, technically this is the body, and the header has a heading. Let's say SEWUNI's kitchen. It also contains the nav bar, and these are the list of my navigation items. Okay, so these are my list items, and the nav bar ends, and then also my header also ends. Now look at the footer. The footer contains copyright information, okay, and an additional information about the page. So this simply tells you that this page is copyrighted in 2022 to, let's say, SEWUNI kitchen. Okay, so that's the work of the footer, and this is the work of the header. Now the navigation or the nav bar. The nav element is used to contain the major navigational blocks on the site, such as the primary site navigation. Now I'm going to show you an example. The example we saw earlier, if you want to finish an article with links to related blog posts, this will not be counted as a major navigational block, and therefore should not sit inside the nav bar or inside the nav element. Okay, so look at the example here. The nav bar contains an unordered list. Okay, and then each list item contains one particular nav item. So you see home with a link, you see the anchor surrounding it, and you see another item which is what, catering, which is also a link, classes, about, and then contact. And the nav bar will what? The nav bar will end. Now let's go to article. The article element that has come to replace a lot of the old traditional way of writing the code. The article element acts as a container for any section of a page that could stand alone and potentially be syndicated. It could be an individual article or a blog entry or a comment or a forum box. or any other independent piece of content. Now, if a page contains several articles, then each individual article will live inside its own article element. So each post will come out with its article element. Okay, so that when you're even styling, it will help you to style all your posts at a go. If you want any specific styles, then you can include your IDs and your classes. Now the article elements can also be nested inside each other. For example, a blog post might live inside another article element, and each comment on the article could live inside its own child element. So this is an example of what I actually mean. You see, so this is an article I'm posting. Now within the article there's another element called figure. This is an image, okay, and this is the caption of the image. Now the figure ends. Then within it there is a header group. Okay, so this explains H2 and H3. There's a paragraph and the article ends. So this is one article. From this point and then to that point becomes one article. And another article also starts with a different figure and a different image and another header group. So that's how the article works. Each individual post may have its own article element, and some can even sit within themselves. Now let's look at the aside element. The aside element is technically used for two things. Okay, now it can be used inside an article and it can also be used outside an article. Okay, when the aside element is used outside an article, it acts as a container for content that is related to the entire page. So you can use this to, let's say, contain a list of recent posts. You can do a search box or RSS feed, what have you. Now when you use the aside element inside an article element, it should also contain information that is related to the article but not essentially to the entire page. For example, you can put a pull quote or glossary might be considered as an aside to the article it relates to. And then if you look at the code, the HTML code, okay, you see aside here for popular recipes, okay, and then the aside here also for contact details. Okay, sections. Okay, the section element groups related content together, and typically each section would have its own heading. For example, on the home page there may be several section elements to contain different sections of the page, such as latest post, top products, new releases. Okay, because the section element groups related items together, it may contain several distinct article elements that have a common theme or purpose. You can also have on your page a very long article. Now the section element can be used to split the article up into separate sections. The section element should not be used as a wrapper for the entire page. If you want a containing element for the entire page, that job is still best left for the div to do that. Now this is the code explaining the sections. Okay, so you can see popular recipe. You can also see contact details, that is giving you the contact information. So it has grouped all this information into one as one section. It has grouped all the popular recipes as one section. Okay, so most of the sections are used for grouping elements together. Now what is the H group or the heading group? The purpose of the H group, which is one of the new HTML5 elements, okay, is to group together a set of one or more H1 through H6 elements. So it can be H1 and H2, it can be two or more heading elements so that they are treated as one single heading. For example, the H group element could be used to contain both the title inside an H2 element and a subtitle within an H3 element. This element has had a mixed reception. When it was first proposed by the people developing the HTML5, there were some complaints and it was withdrawn from HTML5 proposals. However, some people changed their mind and it has been added back into the HTML5. Some suggest that it is of a little use other than as a styling hook. It has, however, been popular with developers who tend to find it very useful, and they group together primary heading and subheadings. Now this is how the H group is used, okay, in HTML5. You see the H2 and the H3 headings have been grouped together as one particular heading. Now figures, you saw figures in my earlier example, okay. So it is important to also note that the article should still make sense if the content of the element were moved, okay. For this reason, it should only be used when the content simply references the element. Examples of usage include images. So in the figure above, the one we did earlier, the example I showed you, you see images was used frequently in figures under the section. And then videos can be graphs or diagrams, okay. It can also be text that support the main body of an article. The figure element should also contain the fig caption, okay. The fig caption element provides a text description of the content, just like the alt used together with what, the image element, okay. I'm going to show you an example of the figure element that was added within an article, okay. Now this is sectioning element, okay. We use the div in sectioning what, of element, okay. However, the div element will remain an important way to group together related elements, because you should not be using this new element that you have just met for purposes other than those explicitly stated. Where there is no suitable element to group a set of elements together, the div will always be very dependable. And I'll show you an example that div has been used as a wrapper for the entire page. I showed you in the layout of the traditional HTML and also the HTML5 element. Some people actually have been asking why content element is not used, okay, to contain the main part of the page. The reason is simple, okay. The reason is that anything that lies outside the header or the footer or even the sidebar or the aside element is considered as the main content, okay. And this is an example of how to section element together, how to put element together in a div. So you see there's a wrapper. This is used as a wrapper to contain the entire page, including the footer and then the header. So the header, the sections, okay, the aside and then the footer is all contained by a div. So a div actually does the work so well in actually putting elements together. Now, linking around block level elements, okay. HTML5 allows web page authors to place an anchor element or the A element around a block level element that contains child elements. This allows you to turn an entire block into a link. This is not a new element in HTML5, but it was not seen as a correct way of the anchor element in earlier versions of HTML. Now look at this code For example, you see there's an anchor, and within the anchor there's this entire set of elements. Okay, so there is an article, a figure, a heading group, okay, and another paragraph. Now all these ones have been put in the anchor, or it has been put with an anchor to make the entire block a link. Okay, now helping older browsers understand or render HTML5. I told you one of the key things we are looking in this chapter is to help old browsers. Okay, now old browsers do not know the new HTML5 element, and then they will automatically treat them as what, as inline elements. Therefore some of the things we do must include the line of CSS, okay, that is going to actually, I'll show you the code that is actually going to tell old browsers that this should be rendered as a block level element and not as an inline element. Also, Internet Explorer 9 or IE9 was the first version of the Internet Explorer to allow CSS rules to be associated with this new HTML5 layout element. In order to start this element using earlier versions of Internet Explorer, you need to use a simple JavaScript known as the HTML5 shiv or HTML5 shim. You do not need to understand JavaScript to use it. You can just link to a copy that Google hosts on its service. It should be placed inside a conditional comment which checks if the browser version is less than has been stated, that is less than Internet Explorer 9. Unfortunately, this workaround does not require that anyone using IE8 or earlier versions of Internet Explorer has JavaScript enabled in their browser. If they do not have JavaScript enabled, then it will not be able to see the content of HTML5. Now this is the HTML shiv. This is the HTML5 shiv or the shim we're talking about. You just have to put this in your code and use this CSS rule to explain that it should display all the HTML5 element as what, as block, and not as what, as inline element. Thank you for taking part in this chapter 17 of our HTML and CSS web development course. See you in chapter 18. Thank you so much.